table in the big room in case you need to. How was your weekend?
Yours?
Yeah, I'm going to see that. It's fine. Hey Marcus, how are you feeling? I'm getting there. You sound a little better.
An article this morning about something I never heard of called sick shaming. It's going on all over the country. People are coughing and they're not well, and people in the workplace are segregating them and corralling them and sending them off in parts
Getting a
remote.
message that we would like you not to be here?
Sick shaming. What?
Oh God.
Matter of time for you. First, I'll see about sick shaming.
So I have to be between usually because it's the only for attendance.
No, Shell has to be at the mediation.
On
The
the air.
judge legally ordered it. As far as I'm concerned, you don't need to be there. If you're available by phone, I'll be satisfied. It will impress the mediator if you can show up.
Oh, I don't want to, I'm sorry. I'm going to sit
Impressing is
here.
good. Impressing is good.
So I'm trying to be smart. Had my contacts with me.
David will be here shortly. He's still driving back.
I think this is just us because there's not, we haven't done anything to push it out. There's not that much on here. I mean, we posted it and we knew about it, but there's nothing to do.
I can report to you on what matters, so at least we have something done.
Does everybody have an agenda or do we need an agenda?
I'm just pulling dots. I didn't know that was what we need.
There really aren't many. In fact, I only have one that I got from Berlin.
Do we need copies of any of that, Eddie? Or we got,
No,
we
I
have
have
enough?
10. I figured that would be
That's
sufficient.
enough.
One for each of you. This is regarding the public noticing of tenants.
Yeah, that's been,
Challenging.
I thought we found, I thought it turned out to be easier than we thought. Not anymore. It was not easy. We're just mailing to occupant?
Well, no, this was the issue with apartments, because we couldn't get a list of names of tenants in apartment buildings. And we reached out to different vendors, we reached out to the post office, and they're like,
We do it just based on apartment.
we ended up finding a way.
We
to-
have, I remember you told me you found a
We
solution.
found a solution, I think the problem is not that
Is that on our agenda? Should we start?
Anytime you guys are ready.
Okay.
Ding, ding.
Ding, ding. Okay, we'll call to order the City Council Public Integrity Standing Subcommittee. I'm Mayor Pro Tem Jeff Coors, and with me is Councilmember Middleton.
Yes.
We'll turn it over for staff. Any public comment? I see none. Review of implementation of ethics, transparency, and governmental reform task force recommendations and ordinance number 1964, adopted October 17th, 2018, Republic Integrity.
So let's proceed in order. Mayor Pro Tem Coors and Councilmember Middleton, we have a whistleblower hotline. There's a presence on the internet making the existence of the whistleblower hotline known to people. I don't think we've had any reports to date that I would regard as really consistent with the essence of whistleblower information. We've had a total of 5 reports. The first was on June 19th. It was, without getting into the specifics, obviously, because these are somewhat confidential matters, this was a matter pertaining to an allegation about things that an employee said in a public setting. And you'll recall that we were just getting our sea legs with respect to this whistleblower hotline. We contemplated the prospect of referring it for investigation. It turned out that that was not the direction we received from the subcommittee. We did refer it to the city manager, and to the best of my understanding, Dr. Reddy had a conversation with the concerned employee, and there, I don't think, was any discipline involved in the matter. June 20th was that was the June 20th matter. The June 19th matter was a complaint from a resident of one of our communities, condominium communities, and it was really more about frustration with some of her fellow tenants. We did aggressively reach out through the city attorney's office to this individual, and we did find out after the fact with continued contact that she had relocated, left the area, and was satisfied that the city had done what it needed to do. Again, no real allegation of any corruption or malfeasance by a city employee. June 26th, we had an anonymous call. We were later able to identify the individual by continued contact. Staff got very involved. It was referred, this particular matter, to the Palm Springs Convention Center. Convention Center staff worked with my staff and the city manager's office to delve into it. It was an allegation of some funds that Palm Springs Resorts had allegedly been solicited for that were part of an effort to defraud. I think, Mayor Pro Tem, of course, you may even remember a little bit of dialogue that we had at the time. Jamie Canfield confirmed for me in an email today that the $5,000, not 30 or 40, that was in fact solicited, was in relation to an event that did in fact take place. It took place at the Air Museum, not the Convention Center, and the $5,000 were appropriately paid based on staff investigation, so there was no, again, malfeasance there. We had an August 26th allegation related to alleged improprieties regarding the police department and the return of some weapons. I've had interaction with subcommittee members on that matter. I've had multiple communications with the individual who initiated the matter, and I'm fixing, even as we speak, to close out the matter with a final formal communication based on information I got from the police department last week. And the last matter is a November 1st report that we had. Also, like the very first report, it was really a neighborhood problem. There was a suspicion of criminal activity at a house in a neighborhood, a suspicion that some squatters may have been located in a home, suspected narcotics activity. Again, not really related to whistleblower activity. As the last one with the firearms, it was referred to the police department. Police did make a thorough investigation of all the matters alleged, and so far, to date, as of December 1st, we had a tenant move into the house that was supposedly vacant, and we had no basis for further criminal activities or investigation by the police department. So they were all sort of closed in an unremarkable fashion. That doesn't mean we've done everything right, and this is what I really wanted to get your direction about with respect to the whistleblower. It may be that in addition to simply having it on the website, maybe we need to do some type of education for our community to let them know that we are, by necessity, our own police force. We police ourselves, but we need them to make those allegations. And I would like your direction on that.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. Yeah, so one question I had is, where is it on the internet?
I believe it's under the city clerk's section.
All right, so we may want it more visible, especially, you know, and maybe a press release just letting people know about it and have it a little more visible for, you know, the start, so we educate the community. And the other question I have is, what have we done to notify employees that they could file confidential reports. I see one of these was an employee report, but
You know, I think we did reach out, but I can't tell you with certainty. We certainly can
So-
reach out, and that would be a
Put your
very
mic on.
easy thing to do. That could be done today.
I think that's something that we should do, and it may be appropriate that it be Mayor Pro Tem Coors and I that are the signatories to that, so that we're identifying to all of staff that this exists. It exists in order to report any suspicions that you have of wrongdoing, and it is certainly my experience, whistleblower more frequently in terms of actually producing substantive reports, it tends to come from employees and former employees. So I think it's important to be reaching out to the community as well, but the most likely place that we will see a substantive report will be from someone who's identified wrongdoing within the organization.
Well, we can have a draft text
Mhm.
to you both later this week with a recommendation, and
Mhm.
we'll take your revisions
Great.
and have it sent out to staff.
perfect, thank you.
And as to the website in general, I don't know exactly where Dr. Reddy's plans and the city clerk's plans with respect to public integrity filings as a general matter have that shake out. I think what was envisioned at the time that the task force was involved was sort of a public integrity clearinghouse location
Yes.
on the website. And I don't know how to implement that. I'm just the city attorney,
Yes, yes,
so
yeah, but that was the thought, but I think we probably should either do a press release or something so it does get a little more visibility on the whistleblower as part of the effort, so the public is aware of it. And then, have public integrity / whistleblower under the city clerk, because that is where disclosure forms are going and all those pieces are already going. I think that would be a good way to do it. And obviously, when we report to council after our quarterly meetings, it's an opportunity for Councilmember Middleton and I to remind people about it and share the phone number publicly.
So if I can just add
Please.
the whistleblower hotline, and there's open government and transparency information, they are under the government tab in the city clerk's, on the city clerk's web pages.
Yeah, and
So
it
that's
probably should be
where
a
they
tab that
exist.
has public integrity /
So we can add-
whistleblower.
Yeah, we can add a
under it.
separate tab.
Yeah, so people know. So that way, if they do a Google search and the word whistleblower Palm Springs, it'll direct them to that, which is the key goal.
So, 2B, video and audio recordation of standing subcommittee meetings. Mr. Brown's informed me that regrettably, or perhaps to the positive, it's a simple matter. Video and audio are possible in the council chambers and the large conference room. These rooms cannot be recorded simultaneously. Sometimes we have two meetings. Because the video comes in through something called a splitter that allows only a single feed to be sent to the switcher and distributed for recording. Any other room in which we have a standing subcommittee meeting, if we want to record it, it's going to have to be through a low-quality audio recording device. We just don't have
Yes.
anything else in place right now.
And that was
I
a
don't know if you
policy.
have direction.
No, the policy that we had recommended was where the equipment exists and it's possible to record them audio and video, where not to record them audio if possible. So that was the direction from the task force and from the subcommittee. Sometimes it may be a low-quality audio, but at least we can put it on the website for people who want to listen to it. And we have it in case, in fact, it came up in one of the subcommittees where the staff person was, I wish I had an audio recording of that, so they could go back and look at the notes. So I think it'll be helpful both internally and externally.
Okay, so we'll see to it that audio recording devices are at the subcommittee meetings if they take place elsewhere.
Yeah. Again, and we're not going to cancel a meeting because we don't have anything. Most of us have phones that could record them if we really needed to. But we want to make sure the public has access to those and staff has access to those.
This is something that is new for us, and I would encourage that before we start it, we actually have Mr. Brown go through a demo of how this is going to work for everyone on council so that we define what the processes are going to be, people get familiarity with it, have an opportunity to ask any questions that they have, and then we can declare, as of this date, having completed the training, now we are going to begin this this process.
I think we've started it today, by the way.
Yeah.
Because we're on the air.
All right. 2C, I have input for you from Mr. Gladders and also from Mr. Fagg, from the city clerk. The city clerk's office coordinated the initial and original filing of the disclosure forms with subsequent quarterly filing. All city council and planning commissioners have filed their statements, and the clerk's office continues to work with other commissioners to obtain full compliance. There are still 17 commissioners who have not yet filed their initial statements. That's not because the city clerk hasn't followed up. The city clerk has. They've continued to send reminders and make phone calls. They recommend that the subcommittee consider the prospect of an ordinance modification to eliminate the quarterly updates to the public integrity disclosure form and Form 700. Their theory is that pursuant to state law, the Form 700 annual statement is due in April and covers the period of the prior calendar year. So that, for example, April 19 would cover all of calendar 2018. Regarding and requiring quarterly updates doesn't align well from the clerk's vantage point with the filing period established by the FPPC. It's recommended that the code be modified to require an update in July every year, covering the prior 6 months.
So once a year?
So, yeah.
That's fine.
Sort of breaking the year up. And it's recommended that the update exclude the receipt of gifts. The clerk's concern, and I don't think it's unreasonable, is that mandated filers, say a planning commissioner, for example, might report a gift received during the mid-year update and be unaware that he or she must repeat that report in the next annual report. Let's say, again, received a gift of $150 value in the month of May. That would be on the July report. The person who made that report might fail to report it again in the actual Form 700. That's the clerk's concern. I can only say Anthony's been dealing with these issues much longer, or in a different fashion is probably a better way to say it than I have, and it's up to you whether as a matter of policy that makes sense.
I'm sympathetic to that. One of the things that we were wary of is creating some kind of gotcha where individuals who have absolutely the finest of intentions of completing the reports miss a deadline or something. And so if you've completed the report once, it is very conceivable you think, I've done this. So I'm open to any recommendations that the city clerk would have to make the process more efficient for the filers, just so long as we ultimately know that we will receive a report of all reportable information.
And then the first filing due from council members and commissioners, do you know what date that was?
I believe that it was April of 2018, after the first quarter of 2018. That's my recollection, but I'd have to...
And people all got a notice, and it sounds like a phone call and an email to do the updates. If they didn't, they were given extensions. But I think if there's anyone serving in one of these roles who, by April, has not filed, they need to be told we're going to have to remove them from commissions.
April of this calendar year.
Yes, I think a year is more than enough time. It probably could be less, but let's give people the opportunity. And if people have, but let's make sure, because I have heard from one person that they had questions about what they could or couldn't put on the form, clients, if they're an attorney or an accountant that they were confidential and still didn't feel they had enough information. So I don't want someone penalized for that. We have to make sure we're very clear on what you do with people who are in professions with it would breach confidentiality to share those with the city. They have to be able to share them and have them redacted, or just the city attorney sees them. But we need to come up with a policy on that before we would remove anyone, out of fairness.
If it's a substantive issue like
Yes.
that for the reporter.
Yes.
When, and I don't want to give the city clerk work that's not fair or responsible, but if he could have a few minutes on the agenda of all of our boards and commissions
Being very green, by the way.
over the course of the next 2 months, in which he could take and remind everyone at the commission with a copy of the report being handed out
That's great.
there of what they need to do, and it's an opportunity for each commission to collectively ask any clarifying questions.
That's a great idea.
And as a further update, I do routinely get calls from commissioners, and I just got a call last week from a new airport commissioner regarding concern about some stocks. So these calls do come into the city attorney's office. We do handle them on a routine basis, but I think that with your direction, we'll go after the 17 who haven't had the time, at least insofar as letting them know.
Great.
With respect to the other side of the reporting or disclosure form, that's really from officials. I would talk a little bit about applicants. And I went actually to both Flynn and Craig. Mr. Gladders, our procurement manager, and Flynn Fagg, our planning director. Flynn's comments were very simple, and I think that implementation has been relatively smooth on his end. He advised that they implemented the new form December 20th. The forms provided to all applicants submitting discretionary entitlement applications, and the form will be included in the backup materials for all discretionary items for both the Planning Commission and the City Council. Mr. Gladders has expressed more than one time a certain level of concern about this, and this is something that I, as your city attorney, wanted to also bring to you. I'll read you his words first. Thank you for providing the form. As we've been implementing the new form, it has come with challenges and comments from some vendors and firms as to the purpose, intent, and for us to explain the background or reasoning. It's been particularly challenging when dealing with large, publicly traded corporations and when we're working with regional sales reps or employees that are not from the corporate headquarters and then are being asked to execute a form under penalty of perjury if anything on the form is not accurate or true. As a practical matter, when dealing with a large publicly traded corporation, we have had to get the form routed to corporate headquarters for someone to review and fill out the information. And also it can be challenging to obtain a list of every single director as well as the living beings that own the 5% interest that our ordinance addresses in the corporation. Procurement's doing its best to obtain compliance and working through issues as they arise, and will continue to seek guidance from the subcommittee, the city council, as necessary. For my part, I think it would be helpful for procurement and also for staff, and Mr. Fuller has dealt with this himself on a number of occasions. With respect to the publicly traded companies, or maybe that's not even the threshold, maybe there's a better threshold as a matter of policy. It seems that if we're delving to the level of directors, officers, all those in positions of authority, and we're asking them to go to the 5% level, there's a place with respect to size of a company when that becomes a little bit more onerous perhaps than the subcommittee even wanted or intended. And I don't know where that place is, so I'm asking for guidance. And what we could do is come up with a regulation that Dr. Reddy could sign that would modify the requirement of the ordinance only insofar as it related to either publicly traded or those much larger entities. Because, again, I think that when Craig is routinely running into these things, and Marcus and staff are running into them as well, I just want you to be aware of that. If we want to stick to our guns, that's fine. But I want the subcommittee informed.
I think, a 5% owner, let's take out publicly traded for a minute, of a large corporation, I think we need to know that. That's where we could run into conflict issues. You're talking about, someone who could have millions and millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we may not know that that person creates a conflict for us. I think publicly traded companies are a little less of a concern because anyone could look up information on them. So just thinking off the top of my head, not having had time to know this was part of the conversation, is sort of what I'm thinking.
I'm in agreement with that. My concerns with publicly traded corporations are significantly less because that information's generally a part of the public record.
Yeah, they have their SEC filings and
So,
everything else, that's exactly right.
So we can know that. But privately traded organizations is where we're trying to create the information so that we have that knowledge.
Well, I didn't intend today to be your full, complete direction.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do is raise the issue, make you aware, and if it's appropriate, I would request that my office work with the subcommittee directly, offline, and that you give me direction on verbiage for regulation where we address these things. You'll have more time to think about it and give us that direction.
To the best of your knowledge, are we creating a new ordinance that there is not a comparable ordinance in any other municipality that we've been able to find?
When I was working on the ordinance itself, I did find that Naples, Florida had a similar ordinance.
Okay.
Naples is another beautiful community, a tourist community as well, but that was where I had to look to find an ordinance exactly like ours.
So the reason I raised the question is, so what percentage did they use? 5%, 10%?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think it was 5.
I think that's how we picked it.
Probably
Okay.
based on the same kind of logic that Mr. Friedman and your fellow committee member relied upon.
That gives us some precedent to fall back on, because the big question for me is what should the threshold be? And we don't have a whole lot of information to go on in terms of defining where it should be.
I've never heard Marcus or Craig or any member of your staff, certainly not my office, hem or haw about a smaller company and a 5% interest, because I think Mayor Pro Tem Coors is 100% correct. Anybody who owns 5% of a smaller privately held company.
Yeah,
Right.
now we've got the form, we're getting
Right.
it up front, and,
Yeah, that helps.
and
Okay.
what I'm finding though is that even though we're trying to make them understand, you gotta get down to the level of a natural person, I'm still seeing forms that come in and they just list, oh, this is managed by this other LLC, and then that's where it stops.
Right. And that's one of the places we've had problems as a city.
And that we should follow.
Right, so we do need to follow up on that, and, on the penalty of perjury, especially if you're dealing in the kind of situations you've discussed, it's to the best of their knowledge. We're not trying to play gotcha, we want people to take it seriously. Right. I mean, if people are, giving us what the information they have, that's what we want, but for, publicly traded companies, I think we can be different, as Councilmember Middleton points out, that's available. People can go search that online. But, there are enormous private entities, small ones and enormous private equity companies, venture capital firms who own companies who bid on contracts for the city. We have one coming up now, and we need that information.
100%, and these disclosures are crucial. The individual with whom I spoke last week, literally last week, new airport commissioner, owned a significant amount of American Airlines stock and was asking. I said, yes, you have to disclose that.
Yeah.
You're an airport commissioner. That's the kind of thing that you need to know. So the ordinance is working, I think, is
Yeah,
what Marcus
great.
is telling you.
Yeah, that's great.
And we'll come
Thank
up
you.
with a regulation, a draft regulation for your review on publicly traded companies only.
Perfect, thank
To
you.
go back to what Marcus said, I really do appreciate following up that we get to natural, real people. When I'm looking at those staff reports, that's the information I'm trying to get.
Yeah, so I'll be working with Flynn, because the planners, they don't have a sense of how some of their applicants have these complicated
Structures?
that have multiple levels of
Yes.
business entities. So
And
we'll be helping them along.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll catch those if they don't.
Great.
if we could, as we start to move forward with this, I know the firms like to give you the million LLCs that they have.
That's right.
What we're critically interested in, perhaps in boldface, is here are the natural people and this is their percentages.
And it's all spelled out in the instructions for completing the form, but I don't know. I'm not sure there's anything we can do apart from follow-up in that respect.
Right.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next item is the communication from the city clerks. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the tenants are first.
And just to
and
clear,
what-
it's residents, right? Tenants,
Tenants who are
residents, right. It's occupants, because businesses as well, right, it's occupants is what we're really looking for.
And at the time of the adoption of the ordinance, there
Right.
was a lot of direction on the council
Yeah.
dais to focus on that word tenants. That's the only reason I.
Yeah,
focused on
no,
it.
I mean, it's tenants, business or
Yes.
residents, right? They're not the property owners, so tenants is fine, just make sure, for the public, that it's clear it's businesses as well as residential tenants.
Absolutely.
And like you know, for all properties, it's easy because we just toggle a switch in our GIS system and it's occupant or resident or owner. And it goes to both if there's a different
great.
address.
So
But the issue was with apartments.
Right.
the timeline from Flynn is as follows. August 2018, we contacted our mapping provider, GovClarity, to see what they could do to create a layer for apartments and renting entities. September 2018, GovClarity provided a proposal or an estimate on creating the addressing functions for apartments, but required the city to provide apartment addresses. September 2018, the city's IT department contacted the U.S. Postal Service to see if we could obtain a database of apartment addresses. December of 2018, the city received the apartment database and authorized GovClarity to begin building the address layer. And in January, the city received the requested address layer from GovClarity and is in the process of testing the accuracy of the function. And I provided this image
Right.
because Flynn sent me this image as an example of what we're doing.
Great.
And we are expecting the layer to allow this functionality.
You might.
We're expecting the layer to provide this functionality to be online for the March 2019 Planning Commission and City Council meetings. So you sort of see the way that this will work,
Yep.
I think, on the example. And that's where we are. Marcus, can you add anything there?
That's great, thank you. I really appreciate everyone's work on that.
Okay, and next was the item with respect to Planning Commission actions and what our planning department is doing. I think you all know quite well this one, but for the public who wants to monitor these proceedings, Flynn is routinely sending out a list of Planning Commission actions, both final dispositive planning actions and those that will be forthcoming to the City Council. He's sending that to the City Council, but in the interest of transparency, he's also posting it on the internet. And that seems to be working. Council
Yes.
members seem to know
Yes.
when they want to call matters up. We've had a number of call-ups, and I think the proof's in the pudding. That one works.
Yes, thank you, very good.
Anthony provided an update on lobbying. And he indicated that a webpage has been created with information on the registration process, advising of the mandatory verbal statements, and the posting for registered lobbyists. To date, only one entity has filed a lobbyist registration statement. A notice with instructions for mandatory verbal statements will be posted on the City Council podium. I take it hasn't been yet, but it will be, to ensure speakers are aware of the regulation. And that's where we are right now. So any direction would be appreciated.
I think it would be helpful to have all the council members to have the form, and so when we have meetings, we can advise people. It's usually pretty obvious to us if someone is a paid lobbyist versus a resident coming in with an issue, but not always. There have been times we've been surprised. So it's easy for us to have the forms in our office so we can educate people. Because I think a lot of it is education. People just don't realize this is a new regulation. And so the more we can do to educate
Okay.
people who are coming up, I think the idea of having it at the podium when people sign in on their cards, or even on the card, if you're a paid representative, it could just be a check mark on the card. That might be a good way to educate people. You know, you need to disclose it, please check here if you are.
I like that.
Thank you.
And that should be disclosed to, as part of the announcement.
Yeah, if they're not already registered in writing, as you know, our ordinance was never intended to be a
Right.
gotcha. It was intended to provide
But
information.
it
so-
actually can maybe be said by the mayor when he or she opens public comment,
Yes.
right?
No, it's easy to do.
And if we
can
do that
change
for a
the-
couple months, it'll really help educate people on it. To just please identify if you are, and I have it on the card as well.
Oh, in addition to the card, having the mayor's comments.
At the beginning,
Solicit that
when he talks about
information.
public comment, 2 minutes just on agenda items now, et cetera, say, if you happen to be paid, by an entity or speaking on behalf of, you need to identify
Yeah.
it and have a check mark on the card as well.
I can put some language together.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes my report for agenda item number 2. And I apologize, I don't have the resolution that I wanted to get the guidance on printed out. Perhaps Ms. Cairns has it? 26-191? Okay, we'll have to take a 5-minute recess, but perhaps we can finish the balance of the agenda and come back to this item. I could go get it and come back while you're handling number 4, and Marcus will take notes. I'll be right back.
So number 4, the first is, any other subcommittee comments?
You have it?
No, you? Okay. The next is the city attorney report, which I think we've already received. And the last one is discussion of potential training sessions. And so one thing I want to, I know that, council every 2 years has to do there's an online training or go to a conference. But since we have laws that exceed state law, I do think doing an in-house training for staff and commissioners and recording it, so it's on the website for those who can't make it, at least every 2 years, if not annually, on what's different in our city laws would be really helpful so people are aware of it.
Actually, Councilman, I think we probably need to have a real good, comprehensive, formal training protocol for newly electeds and boards and commissions. So
Yes.
why don't I put it together, a draft, get it to the subcommittee, and then you can give us a little direction, and then we will formalize it. We'll have actually a formal policy.
Yes, and in fact, the ad hoc government reform, transparency, ethics subcommittee, which I think continues till middle of this year, has recommendations on that, and the working group made recommendations. So when we have our ad hoc meeting to finalize some of their recommendations that still have been implemented, why don't we look at that and look at what you're thinking, and let's come up with a policy that we can then bring back to the council.
Okay, that was a different subcommittee?
This is a standing subcommittee just on public integrity, but there are recommendations on training, some more on diversity and outreach that we still need to implement. We waited because we had the California Voting Rights Act working group who also had recommendations, and we wanted to combine them before we brought anything to council. But I think doing training, especially for new council members and commissioners, is really important, and I think would be very helpful, so thank you.
Yeah, it's overdue.
And with that, we can wait until the city attorney returns with a document, which should be any moment. Do you want to see?
I think we want the city attorney or city manager to advise us about his skiing trip.
It was a fun day, and I can report no falls because the one snowboarder that hit me and knocked me down doesn't count as my fault, right?
Depends where you are.
Yeah, that's true.
Depends where you are.
All right. Thank you. This is what you
Sorry about the delay. I can proceed whenever the two of you are ready.
Let's do it.
So this is a revisitation of the city's AB 1234 ordinance, actually resolution policy. These were adopted across the state a little bit more than a decade ago, and Palm Springs policy is extremely consistent with what I've seen for the majority of cities. What I mean is that it's extremely permissive. There are some pretty clearly laid out criteria in the actual resolution, and I have copies being printed to the extent you want to delve into it. But the real direction that I wanted to get from you as a sort of introduction item for your discussion is, are you comfortable with the prospect of a council member or an official being in attendance at a local function where the function itself requires some type of a payment for a place at that function, whether it's a luncheon or an afternoon ceremony with some honor being bestowed upon somebody? And if you are, then we don't need to go any further. We have a policy that allows that type of activity. There's not a lot of definition in the ordinance, in the policy, about how far the local event needs to connect.
Copies.
Yeah, I have multiple copies coming down. I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay.
To the city itself. In other words, if it's a regional function, say that there's hypothetically a 501c3 that's active valley-wide, it would be perfectly okay for a Palm Springs City Council member to, here's the full resolution. And I guess I'm talking about, it's Exhibit A, the resolution itself. There should be more copies there, Lisa, underneath yours. No, it's, that's the entire packet.
Obviously, without having had time to review this before this conversation, we can just give general
That's what I'm looking for.
thoughts. I mean, I do think there is definitely some confusion that we've heard for people is, can you accept 2 free tickets to a 501c3 or campaign event, which is my understanding from the FPPC regulations, that you can accept a ticket for yourself and a guest. But what reporting is necessary? So, I mean, I think we need to look at what the FPPC allows and doesn't allow, and if we want to go beyond that.
Well, typically speaking, the FPPC rules and this policy are really they're not directed at the same thing. The FPPC rules are looking to define the gifts that come to you. When this policy comes into play is when the city funds are being used to procure your place.
I understand.
If somebody's bestowing that as a gift, that would definitely be within the FPPC purview.
Right, but I do think people involved with the city, council members, staff, et cetera, need to understand what the FPPC rules are as well, because there are people who have not gone to events that I'm aware of that they were offered 2 free tickets to because they thought it was illegal, which, according to the FPPC, if it's a 501c3 or campaign event, is not. So I think it's important that we train people on what the law is, not just the city law, but the state law is involved, so people understand what they're allowed to do, and if they accept free tickets to a nonprofit event, is that reportable? Is it not reportable?
I could put that training togetger very quickly.
I do not think people understand that.
Yeah, so what do you believe our current policy is now? We are doing it, we are allowed to.
Well,
Yes.
Our current policy ties to if the city receives free tickets, not if the individual does. And then there's the issue of use of contingency funds for donating to nonprofits, which has happened, which we understand we're not supposed to be doing, but that hasn't been told to the whole council yet. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty among council members about what they can do and not. If you support an event and you're not going, can you do that? If you do, is it in your name or is it in the city's name since they're city's funds? I don't think there's any understanding among the council on what the rules are.
And when you and I first had that discussion at least a year ago about 501c3s wanting to make places available to council members and/or other officials here at the city, we talked about this policy, but we talked about it as an abstraction.
Is there a bright line? We're allowed, we're not allowed? Can we just?
The bright line for purposes of contingency funds is that if there's a way to articulate, and I'll show you right in the policy where I'm talking about. If you look at participating, it's on the first page of Exhibit A. In regional, state, or national organizations whose activities or interests may affect the city, if it's attending city-sponsored or co-sponsored events, and then here's the catch-all, or other community events. That provides enough latitude for the expenditure of those contingency funds if it's a community event. Now, that doesn't mean that's what the council wants. That is what the law allows vis-a-vis AB 1234.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
That's assuming it's a 501c3, right? If it's a political organization, we can't use city funds. Are you allowed to bring a guest to the events? I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, again, that I'm constantly asked by other people, can I do this, can I not? So I think this is not clear.
I completely agree with you. This does not provide the level of detail that as a standalone document would be of any value to a council member.
Exactly. So that's what we need.
I think we need to step back a little bit. There needs to be a clear definition given to every member of City Council regarding contingency funds. This is how much you have in this account and that can be used. These are the things it can be used for. And then I believe there should be an annual report that is available to the public. During the course of 2019, Councilmember Middleton had available X amount of contingency funds and used those funds for the following purpose. And that becomes a report that is shared with everyone.
Yeah, receive and file and on the public integrity website.
Yep.
We could certainly do that.
And that.
I think that's for city funds, but we also need, if I'm being invited to speak at an event or not speak, can I, we can be clear, use city funds, can you bring a guest or not? And two, what if an organization offers me free tickets? Am I allowed to accept one and a guest, which is my understanding from FPPC, but we need that clear. And what are the reporting requirements, if any, of that? I think all that needs to just be very clear, and because it applies not just to council, it applies to commissioners and certain members of staff.
There is another widely misunderstood, maybe not known provision in here that I think needs clarification. You're not allowed, and to your point, Mayor Pro Tem Coors, you cannot go to political events, and that is specifically covered on the next page. It's not addressed in the first list, but it is addressed in the second list.
But don't we have to be clear that you're not allowed to go to them with city funds? If you can go to a political or campaign event without paying for you and a guest, I believe, under state law. So I think we need a lot of clarity about the difference there, use of city funds and then use of invitations where you're not paying.
Yes, and I would also add that straight charitable contributions where you're not attending an event, but you'd like to use contingency funds, that is prohibited by the current policy.
And if you're using contingency funds, is it Mayor Pro Tem Coors or Councilmember Middleton that's listed, or is it the City of Palm Springs that's listed? So that's something we need to be clear on as well. Or is it both? I mean, but this is the kind of stuff, there's a lack of understanding, and we need to be able to tell a nonprofit if city funds are being used from one of our contingencies for an event, how we or the city should be listed. So it's very clear. So the more clarity, the better.
Would it be preferable to toss this and start from scratch, or do you want to try to amend this? Because this document, the way it's written, as I said, it's extremely template. It's very vanilla. This is the way almost all of these policies read.
Whatever you think will result in the most clarity, if you want to keep this and then add an addendum that says, here's more specifics and examples so people understand it, I think is very helpful. And, for commissioners, they don't quite have the same access to the city attorney that we do. And we shouldn't be taking up your time with questions that we can just pick up something and know the answer to.
I think a simple Q&A format for boards and commissioners, for city managers.
Right.
For everyone.
That was going to be my recommendation, rather than chucking this.
Yeah, that's fine, but let's have examples and a little more clarity in this. Let's amend this for clarity and then give some the obvious examples.
Because what's been happening in the past, if it's a city sponsor, it would just obviously be, the city sponsor, the tickets would be distributed, but when council members do it from their contingency, it's just individual. So.
Right.
That's just all it's been, sort of informally. So I guess, we need some more clarity here. But one thing I wasn't certain what you said, if they want to go to a charitable event, they cannot use their contingency fund?
They can't, no, they can if they're going. They can't just write a check as a charitable donation. They can go to a community charity event.
We write a check to buy the ticket.
Correct,
Yes.
and that's permissible.
Okay.
But if no one is going, let's say, to the golf tournament, right, we can't do it. Although we could do it from our contingency and make the tickets available for staff to use, correct?
You certainly
But someone
could.
from the city has to be there. The goal is to have the city represented, not to use that for supporting organizations who are doing events, because we have another pool now that we've created for that purpose.
Understood.
Okay.
So examples and clarification is the direction, and I can do that easily, no problem.
And then we'll incorporate that into the part of the training protocol.
Yeah, and we can give a formal training if you want that made.
I think we may ultimately need that.
Yes, and I think we discussed doing
I will need it.
doing an annual training while you were away, getting this document. So on a bunch of issues.
Sure.
Or at least biannual, and for new commissioners and council members.
No, the
So they
training
understand the
session I
rules.
gave when we rolled out our local Palm Springs forum, I think there was more than 100 people that showed up, and it was very well received.
And the next time, I don't know if that was videoed.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so it would be good to get that online. If it's not online, easily, oh, good.
Yeah.
I should watch it. Yeah, I think that's good. I think it really helps people understand. Everyone wants to do the right thing. They just need to know what it is. So,
Well,
okay.
thank you for having this discussion.
Sure.
I've been wanting
Yeah,
to have it for a while.
perfect. I think we're done. Anything else, council member, staff?
No?
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.